Hello, my name is Neil McRae and I work for BT, and today I'm going to be talking about SDN and NFV and practical business applications of it. I look after network architecture at BT, which is probably, of all the jobs I've done, probably the most interesting, because in the morning you could be talking about broadband, in the middle of the day something on TV, in the afternoon working with an enterprise customer, and then late at night dealing with a problem in the IT system of one of our BT fleet, which is company cars and vans, etc. It's probably the most widest ranged, what we do in BT is probably the widest range of different products and services I've ever come across, and actually it's reflected in some of the feedback we get from people like Gartner. So I'm here to talk about NFV and SDN, and I think the team at BT would say I'm somewhat of a realist around these technologies. And people say, Neil, what's your NFV or SDN strategy? And I actually don't understand that question. For me, the question is what is our network and technology strategy? And how does NFV or SDN or any other technology for that matter play into it? If I just cover a little bit about BT, just to start off, really our purpose is about using communications to make a better world. That's intrinsic in everything that we do, and we are one of the few companies where everything we do actually improves the lives of people. Typically, if I look at our NGA program, where we're rolling out fibre across the UK, we just lit up Orkney Islands, and the difference that's made to that community is fantastic. And if you go and see that, it's really it's quite mind-blowing, because I'm used to a world where I've always had fast broadband. You go to a place where they don't, and it's quite powerful seeing things that all of a sudden can be done with it. Our key focus right now is customer service. I think we've got a lot of work to do in that space, and we recognise that. We're obviously focused on cost, like any operator, but also we're investing in growth. So we're investing over $2.5 billion in NGA, plus a load of other investments in TV, our core network, and our global network. Our key kind of projects, fibre, I've talked about, TV and content, where we launched BT Sport last year, mobility and future voice, which actually literally on Friday, we've completed a big set of our first trials on our 4G platform, and we've launched 4G into the business market. We're also focused on small business, launching new, virtualized kind of cloud-based voice solutions for small and medium businesses and more mobile services, and also working with leading global companies. And again, my role gets me exposed to 2 or 3 of them, and I'm working with some companies actually on this topic, NFV, SDN, and what I kind of look back at really what do customers want, what do subscribers want, what do users want, and literally the thing that rings out for me is speed and stability. I want to do things quickly, but I want them to be stable. And quite often those are a trade-off. You do something too quick and it's wobbly. You do something too slow and you miss the market. And I think the interesting point about the survey, I would say, is when I see these surveys, I always say, we're going to get more revenue. Is that different revenue? Is it a new revenue stream, or is it just the same revenue that's kind of changing the kind of shape of it? And I would argue, I remember sitting in front of the CIO of JP Morgan maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, and he said to me, Neil, if you cut your lead times by half, I'll double the business I give to you. And I think one of the big pushes for me in this network virtualization and software-defined network is, can we deploy services to customers quicker? And I think that on its own has huge value. And I think the other dynamic here is, and everyone talks about devices and apps and all that stuff, but I think if you're a traditional business, a branch office business, for example, I can't remember seeing a branch office business where they said that transactions in their branches was growing at the same rate transactions online were growing. So if you imagine you're a branch office bank, more and more of your transactions are happening online, and actually one of your biggest barriers to being successful is your ability to get new online services. And typically most of these organizations don't have the right infrastructure or capability to really roll out a digital application with the right level of reliability, scalability, and of course security is the other big challenge here. What is NFV and SDN? So when creating the slides for these presentations, always kind of like, where do I pitch this and how do I pitch it? I tried to look at things in the simplest view. If I look at network function virtualization, there's a huge amount of hype around that, and I kind of struggle with it because I've worked in data centers where we've been doing virtualization for like almost 10 years now. In fact, I remember doing domain name service, a key network application on virtualized platforms about 7 years ago. Is that NFV? Could well be. I think the key thing about that everyone looks at in NFV is, oh, we'll be able to use any kind of cheap tin. You know, that box that you saw on eBay, we'll buy that, we'll stick it in a data center, we can run our whole network on it. Unfortunately, the reality is probably quite far away from that. What we often find is, if you know, depending on the application, particularly in the network space, the platform you need versus the platform that's what you would call commodity compute are quite different. And I'll give an example of that. We're doing something on analytics. In order to make that a virtualized service, we're having to put really expensive network cards into the servers because we need a performance level that, frankly, right now we can't get from a commodity server. We also see it in, you know, Intel. A lot of Intel's architecture is really driving to improve their ability to cope with network. But one of the challenges, one of the answers they have, and in my mind this is a really bad direction, is, oh, we'll put loads of buffers into the server so that when we can't cope with the volume of transactions, we'll buffer them. I've worked in networks for 20 years. When you buffer, bad things happen. That's my kind of DNA, if you like, and I think it's something we need to make sure that the platforms that we roll out are really capable of delivering the service we need. SDN, for me, SDN is far more exciting, and actually I think any large deployment of NFV will struggle unless you have a strong NFV strategy alongside it. Why is that? Well, literally, one of the biggest challenges most operators face is it's really easy to build servers in a data center, turn them all on, get them all the flashing lights, storage up and running, putting apps on, relatively straightforward. But then interconnecting that with a customer network or another supplier's network, or just plugging it into a wide area network is where the challenge typically is. You've got to think about firewalls, you've got to think about who's accessing it, where is it, what's the latency, what's the performance, and quite often we just chuck a few boxes in, turn it on, and hope that everything works well. More often than not, that doesn't really work. And what SDN, I think, gives us is an ability to move from if you like, a push model where we're having to push things into the data center to a world where it's pull. If you imagine an example where you want to create an application, and the application can go, hey network, I'm here, and SDN does everything it needs to do. It understands the application. It understands that, oh, this is a banking application, so I probably want to encrypt everything. And the controller says to the network, let's encrypt everything. And it just happens. And SDN, there's a couple of kind of protocols that are named quite often. One is OpenFlow. And the other big protocol that's being used for SDN is a well-known protocol called BGP, Border Gateway Protocol, which kind of makes most of today's layer 3 networks work. Actually, there's no right or wrong in them. Different protocols work better for different technologies. The one thing that's interesting about OpenFlow is it has a very powerful command modeling capability. If you imagine what's one of our biggest challenges, certainly in BT and the other telcos I've worked in, configuring the network is a huge challenge for us. You've got thousands of devices in different locations with different capabilities. In OpenFlow, there's a technology called Yang or NetConf, which allows you to build a model and for you to manipulate that model, which then manipulates the network. And actually, you'll see, in fact, the Juniper guy might talk about this next. Juniper's latest release of Junos is you can configure it via Yang. And we're seeing more and more of the operators moving to that direction. Actually, BT working with Google and some other partners, we released a standard last week all around how you declare a network in Yang, and it's something from a BT point of view, the configuration and the automation capabilities of it we think are very valuable, not just in this kind of new world, but also in the kind of legacy world. Moving on, some example use cases, virtual data centers. SDN and to a large extent NFV has come out of the web scale companies, Google, Yahoo, those sort of guys. And those guys are, they run huge data centers with lots of different apps, millions of users, and the challenge they faced was bringing an application out into the wild was really difficult because they had all this network technology that they had to manage. And SDN allows them to launch something and for that app to signal the network to say, I'm Google Search, I need these type of capabilities. In BT, we're currently deploying this on our BT Cloud Compute platform where we'll enable customers to create certain application profiles, and from those profiles, depending on the application you're connecting, we'll roll out network capabilities aligned with your application. I think that enabling virtual data centers is probably the strongest use case right now. In fact, in my mind, it's a no-brainer in terms of data center connectivity. And if I look at the survey, will it save me heads? Absolutely. Will it save me capex? Probably not. Will it save me opex? Absolutely. Will it bring revenue in? Maybe not new revenue, but it will certainly reduce the lead time from order to delivery. Virtual CPE. And I'm going to talk about virtual CPE and value-added service within the network together because I largely think they're the same thing. One of our big challenges in any network deployment, and we had this issue with VPNs 10 years ago, security. Every day, you read about some sort of massive security incident, and there are many clients that I talk to where the notion of putting their information in the cloud, and let's remember let's define cloud. Private cloud, my computers in my data center. Public cloud, someone else's computers in someone else's data center. And that's really how I envisage them. If you're putting your valuable data into someone else's data center on someone else's computers, what controls do you have? And often we find that that's still a barrier for many clients ultimately the CIO usually has an audit and security responsibility, and they want to ensure that what they put into the network is valuable. So how can we help? Well, actually, we can bring those network-based functions to the client using a virtual CPE. So if you imagine a kind of a thin device on site, it's effectively a PC, and we can push different applications to it. There's three that kind of spring to mind. Firewalls. Every customer that I engage with, at some point in the engagement, their firewall infrastructure is a major problem for them. WAN optimization, lots of global companies, people in India and in the Far East, how can we optimize the WAN so that services are more effective? Personally, I think WAN optimization is a bit of in some ways it's a bit voodoo-ish. I think if applications were written better, we wouldn't have to worry about WAN optimization. And then finally, things like voice services. More and more companies have got agile type desk environments, moving voice, adding offices and moving people around. I think that's another area where we can do that from the CPE. We can also do all of those things in the core of the network. And largely there's not a big difference in terms of the economics or the capabilities. I think there are some things where you always want to have them on site, local network. When you plug into a network, there's a little bit of chat that goes between your laptop and the switch just to get plugged in. That always needs to be local. Being able to talk to the most local printer. A lot of people think that printers, you're crazy, but actually it's one of the biggest pain points we hear from CIOs is about printing. It drives them nuts. Traffic engineer services across the WAN. So this is something that, again, BT, we've been pushing really aggressively. In BT, we run a number of different platforms, and I kind of divide them into two: legacy and strategic. Our legacy platforms are things like Megastream, Killerstream, old products that we've been selling for years. 2 meg, 64Ks. Believe it or not, there's still actually the demand for 2 meg services shocks me by increasing still every year. I find that amazing. But there are some vertical segments where that service is very useful. Utilities, traffic lights, where a lot of the services out there are synchronous, and that type of technology works really well for them. There's also mission critical stuff. A nuclear power station is the scary example I use, where the guys that run those sort of plants really want to make sure that the network connecting them is 100% resilient, and actually 100%, you've got an east path and a west path, and none of them touch. Actually, today in IP networking, that's quite difficult to achieve. So we've been working on a technology called segment routing, which adds to the network, allowing you to specifically set paths in the network, using a network path computation tool. So effectively a box that says, I'm going to manage all these paths and make sure the traffic's separate. And segment-based routing, again, is supported by all the big vendors: Juniper, Cisco, Alcatel-Lucent, Huawei. I think even Arista are now signed up for it. So, and this will give us an ability to add a lot more resiliency and redundancy into today's IP networks. It's a bit of a botch in some respects, but I think it works really well, and it scales. The other approach that we've used to do this typically doesn't scale or requires a lot of money to scale. So in BT, where are we deploying NFV and SDN? So our big focus right now is rolling this out into a BT Cloud Compute. We have a pilot up and running now, and it works really well. And I'm absolutely convinced that that is a strong deployment scenario, and it will grow and we will use it. We're working on a product with NFV on branches. We'll initially pilot that. What we really want to get to is the place where SDN is controlling those virtualized servers. Otherwise, I think it could get unmanageable very quickly. And if you think about it, here's again the example I use. Imagine a 20,000 square foot data center filled with racks, filled with blade servers. Rough idea how many VMs you could have in that? Let me tell you, it's more than 1 million. If one of those VMs has a problem and you don't have the right tool set, it could take you something like 12 days to find the faulty VM. So ensuring that we're able to manage and operate this capability in the way that we're used to managing it, which is literally 2 to 4 hour type SLAs, is really important. And largely, if I had a challenge for NFV, is we haven't done enough in that whole network operations and management space. That's where the big challenges are going to be. And anyone who's deployed a big IT virtualization project will have the scars from that. I've talked to many CIOs and infrastructure leads where they've got a great story about virtualization, but there's this pain point where they've deployed it, and then it's, crikey, how do we manage this? And I think it's an area of focus. Virtualized network services at the edge. Again, this would be firewalls, voice services. We're looking at that right now. Load balancing, name service, and then really all of this. What's key for us is having a strong control and operational plane that lets us manage this effectively. And largely, what I say to vendors and people who talk about this technology, unless I can operate the service, it's useless technology for me. It has to be operable. Because today's demands on network availability have never been higher and are increasingly getting more and more stringent on what customers demand from the network. Yeah, that's a bit of a build. I hate slides that build. Customer impact. So if you're what do we think how this impacts our customers? So we hope to be able to do fast turn up of value-added services. Again, if I hear from many of our customers, it's BT, we love this service, but God, it takes too long to get it deployed. I want it tomorrow. And I think it's an industry issue. I hear the same challenge that all service providers. Also, try before you buy. WAN optimization is a great try before you buy. Typically, when we do WAN optimization, we have to roll it out into 3 or 4 sites and convince the customer that it's worth investing in. Usually when we do it, the customer always invests in it. It would be nice to be able to do that in a simple, low-cost way to reduce the kind of cost of sale. Traffic engineer network services. So, you know, the big thing I always hear about is algorithmic trading, low latency trading, and you know, that's something that with this type of solution, along with our IP networks, but also our more lower level transmission optical networks, we think that there's an opportunity to perhaps sell services that are more friendly in that space, but not or inconsistently so. So, you know, if you've got a latency of 10 milliseconds, or the SDN controller, no matter what happens in the infrastructure, if there's a fiber break or a failure, the controller will try and re-establish that path with those type of characteristics. Resilience models, I mentioned them earlier on. You know, if you can restart something quickly enough that most users don't notice it, then it doesn't matter if a service breaks or down. If this was the blue man group, there'd be a camera at this guy saying, "You've turned your mobile on." So the other and the other part about resilience models is around the network itself. Can we use these controllers to bypass issues and outages? But I think the other thing we need to recognise is, unless the underlying infrastructure, the fibre in the ground, the copper in the ground, the buildings, the power infrastructure is resilient, having all this controller stuff probably won't add much value. And then finally, the key thing that we think, you know, being able to put our customers' VPN into our cloud compute service, but also BT, we want to be the kind of partner for all cloud services. So, you know, we're connected up to Microsoft, to many other cloud partners, where if you want to be connected to one of them, then we're the network that's got the right capability to do that in a quick and fast way. And we're building out to a record number of data centers in Oracle, HP, Microsoft, and many others. This kind of just highlights that, you know, working with our data centers and many of the software as a service type guys, our view is to be able to tailor much more of the infrastructure and product set back to users and largely allow them to consume it in the way they want to consume it, be it laptops, be it on-site with a virtual CPE, or be it through the internet or through mobile services. I'm going to talk about another thing that's probably a bit more off the page in some ways. We're trialling something with a number of large banks in London right now, where we've pre-built out a packet and optical network, and we're using SDN to define and provision services really rapidly. And we're adding some capabilities to it. One of the challenges, particularly in the financial sector, but it's generic across many businesses, the regulator and regulations in many different industries are going in one direction. More of them much more complicated to deploy, and more of them, if not deployed right, can be quite expensive. One of those things is transactional timing. So if you do a transaction, when did it happen, and can you prove that the time of that transaction is accurate? So network time as a service, whereby we'll be able to timestamp every transaction at the network level using SDN and NFV. Again, it's probably a niche requirement, particularly in the financial sector, but it also applies to things like payment cards. You know, if you've ever deployed Visa machines or PDQ machines, you know the pain of the payment cards requirements for security. Again, we think SDN would be a way of rolling that security out in a consistent way and making the audit of that security much more simpler. This platform's live. It's in trial right now, and we're working to, we've learned some things from it, some good things, some not so good things. I think one of the challenges we have right now on this platform is actually nothing to do with NFV and SDN. It's around what do people want to buy? 1 gig bandwidth services and above are really easy to deploy on this type of infrastructure. Anything below that, and actually you're largely into legacy technology, and most of it doesn't really support the kind of NFV SDN approach that we would like. So we've had to kind of bolt things on, and which then kind of goes back to my starting point, which is I'm slightly skeptical for 2 reasons. One, I still have to integrate with other things, and typically in telco land, integration of things is where the effort and cost is. And 2, there's an assumption that in NFV and SDN that the capital equipment costs will reduce because we're going to run on all these cheap servers. I really struggle with that, because where we're moving to is a hardware-based kind of economy to a software one, and writing good software can cost equally as much as creating good hardware. So that's one of my other kind of slight questions that I haven't really got a good answer to yet. And that's it from me. Thank you very much.